Hey up! Right, as you might be aware from last week's video, on Friday I went down to see those chaps at Hitchcock's Motorcycles. As you might be aware, I visited them last year to test ride the 350 Meteor. And while I was there, Dan at Hitchcock's tried his best to persuade me to have a ride on the Himalayan, and of course the Royal Enfield Interceptor 865 conversion that they have there. Both of which I declined. First of all, the Himalayan wasn't on my radar at the time, I wasn't really interested in it. And the 865, to be honest, it sort of, what's the word? It doesn't really fit within the remit of this channel. Now, myself and Dan have a bit of a chinwag on the phone every few weeks or few months. And even before the Scram 411 was announced, he kept trying to persuade me to come down and test ride the Himalayan. It's a bike that he thought I would like. And of course, at the same time, over the last sort of 2.5 or 3 years, I've had hundreds of requests from viewers to sort of test ride and review both bikes. So regarding the Himalayan, I finally gave in. And I think part of that was because, I ended up being so impressed with the Scram 411. In a lot of ways, they're basically the same bike. And, spoiler alert, he also talked me into test riding the 865 while I was there, but that's the subject of another video. The Himalayan appeared on the market, I think, 6 or 7 years ago? It was the first brand new, from the ground up model that Royal Enfield had designed and built in decades. And I remember at the time it caused quite a stir. And over the years it's gained a huge following. One thing that did surprise me last year was that it's now becoming quite a common sight to see little squadrons of Himalayans riding about the countryside, leading me to believe that maybe I've missed something. Then of course Royal Enfield invited me to their press release for the Scram 411, a thoroughly charming and capable little street scrambler, and I realised that I really had missed something. As we've discussed, the Street Scram 411 is based on a Himalayan. They have the same chassis, designed by Harris Performance, and the same engine. And whereas the Scram 11 is designed as a bit of a jack of all trades, the Himalayan is a very focused off-road touring tool. The Himalayan was given a little bit of an update, I think it was last year, when the Euro 5 emissions regulations were sort of rolled out. But for me personally, looks-wise, the bike looks a little bit dated. That doesn't detract from its performance, obviously, but I think it could do with a little bit of the Scram 411 treatment from Royal Enfield. And that's just my personal opinion. A revision of the instrument panel and headlamp area would go a long way, as would some new colourways. Sort of monochrome matte over gloss doesn't really do the bike any favours. The whole colour scheme lacks contrast, and personally, it's not what I would describe as being an attractive bike, but then few adventure bikes are. But it's clear this bike, sales-wise, is a winner, so perhaps Royal Enfield just forget that there's no need to jinx the magic by messing the bike around too much. It's a motorcycle that has a cult following. Let's just leave it at that. Now, climbing on board the Himalayan, the first thing I noticed after riding the Scram is the very different seating sensation. Like most bikes, you sit on top of the Scram. The Himalayan, you sort of sit in it. And to me, in relation to the way I was sitting, the tank seemed higher than on the Scram. Now, I think the reason for this is obviously the Himalayan has a bit more ground clearance than the Scram, mainly due to the larger 21-inch front wheel. Clearly, where the Himalayan's concerned, Royal Enfield have had to scoop the rider's portion of the seat out in order to lower it so that the average rider can reach the ground with his feet. Having said that, the reach to the floor was still a little bit further than it is with the Scram. I was able to flat foot it with the Scram. I had to lift my heels up a little bit on the Himalayan. Now, this of course means that the seat is quite a bit thinner than the Scram seat. And one frequent criticism I've heard about the Himalayan is that the seat does get pretty uncomfortable over distances. Unfortunately, I didn't ride this long enough to sort of gauge whether that is the case or not, although it was clear to me that this seat would probably have me squirming after 50 miles or so. This is a common problem with adventure-style bikes. They need the ground clearance for their intended purpose, and that ground clearance often comes at the expense of rider comfort. I've been through 5 BMW adventure-style bikes, and they were all very much the same. Now, I know a lot of people whinge about this kind of thing, but you've got to take into account what these bikes are intended for. They are adventure bikes. They're designed to be ridden on unpaved roads for a lot of the time. So seat comfort is secondary because the rider in those situations is going to be in a standing position. Just for reference, I have a 32-inch inside leg, and although I couldn't completely flat foot it on this bike, I didn't feel as though my control of the bike at a standstill was in any way compromised. Now, as far as riding position goes, just like the Scram, I instantly felt at home on this bike. Some bikes take a few minutes for you to acclimatise to the riding position. In the case of the Himalayan and the Scram, I found I was just, at home immediately. Everything was exactly where it needed to be for me. Now, this is a subjective comment because we're all built differently. Now, the screen I had a bit of an issue with at first. I think it was something to do with the wind direction. The particular Himalayan that I was riding is a development mule owned by Hitchcock's, obviously, which means it's there primarily as a platform for testing prototype parts and fitting accessories as a development aid, and to that end it had a slightly taller screen than is standard. Now again, for clarification, I'm 6 feet tall, long body, short legs, and in some cases over 40 miles an hour I was getting a lot of buffeting around the temple area of my head. So for me personally, this screen in some circumstances wasn't working. It didn't happen all the time, as I say, it was just when travelling over 40 miles an hour in certain directions. If you're an inch or 2 inches shorter than me, it probably wouldn't be an issue. But if you have one of these bikes and you do have this issue with the standard screen, this might be the one to go for. I won't go into the vagaries of screen design, but all screens will create what's known as dirty air as it tumbles off near the top of the screen. So this issue isn't necessarily a product of the screen itself, it's a product of the screen in relation to the size of the rider, if that makes any sense. The only surefire way of getting a screen which will suit all riders is to have a huge, tall, wide screen. But then of course it'll have all the aerodynamics of an open parachute, which probably isn't a good idea for a low capacity bike like this. Comparing this experience with the Scram 411, which has no screen at all, although obviously you can feel wind pressure, it's very clean air, especially around the head area. Unfortunately on this occasion, either trying this bike with the low screen or with no screen at all wasn't an option. In common with the Scram, the Himalayan gives the rider a sense of security. You have a very commanding stance and view of the road, which is exactly what you want for long distance touring. In both cases, these bikes give a sort of a big bike feel that belies their sort of diminutive engine size. Right, the suspension. It did feel a little bit softer and plusher on the Himalayan compared to the two Scrams that I've ridden. But I don't want to dwell on this too much. For a start, I don't know how each individual bike was set up preload wise. The Himalayan is a little bit heavier than the Scram, and it's also covered a few more miles, so the springs possibly have relaxed enough to soften the ride up a little bit. Having said that, the softer feel didn't compromise the handling of the bike. It still felt very sure-footed, although due to the 21-inch front wheel at the front, the feedback from the road didn't feel quite as positive. It was still good, it just felt different. It does, however, alter the handling characteristics of the bike. The Himalayan has a much more sort of laid back, lazy feel to it in the handling department. It's still good, it's just not sharp like the Scram. Although the front brake setup on this bike is the same as it is on the Scram, again, that 21-inch front wheel does alter the braking characteristics. With the additional real estate that 21-inch wheel provides, comes more leverage, which the same brake caliper has to cope with. This means that the braking response at the front is softer than that of the Scram. This shouldn't be seen as a negative if you're using this bike for its intended purpose, because off-road, a softer braking response at the front end is exactly what you want. But even on the road, I wouldn't describe it as being inadequate. It's just softer and requires a little bit more forward planning, which you soon pick up as you get used to riding the bike. It's horses for courses really. Both bikes are designed for a slightly different use, while still using the same engine and chassis for both bikes. I've been asked by several people whether the Scram 411 is actually a Himalayan Killer. I'll cover that off at the end of the video. But first, I just wanted a taste of the advantages of the Himalayan over the Scram. Now, the Himalayan has an enviable reputation as a proper off-road machine. But I personally don't. It's not something I've ever been interested in, so I'm hopeless at it. I didn't know the geography of the area that I was riding in, so I had to stay fairly close to Hitchcock's, but I did manage to find one of those sort of farm tracks where you have a 5-inch mound of earth in the middle of the road, which then becomes overgrown with grass, and I just tried riding along that precarious ridge. You know what it's like on a road bike. You end up slipping and sliding all over the place on these sort of road surfaces. I don't consider myself to be competent off-road, so this was the nearest thing I could get to testing out the balance and competence of this machine on precarious surfaces. Take it for what it is. On any normal bike you would just be slipping off this one side or another, and the Himalayan just took it in its stride. It didn't care. It stayed straight as a die. Granted, it was only a short stretch of road. I actually went up and down it a few times just to, test the capabilities of the bike insofar as my capabilities would allow. Riding a ridge like this on a normal road bike would be dangerous. You would soon lose control. Now, I'm not saying that the Scram 411 can't do this, but I think the Himalayan with the 21-inch skinny front wheel will do it better. And off-road capability is really what the Himalayan is all about. Engine performance between the two bikes is the same. So it depends what your real-world use of this bike is going to be. Yes, in some ways I think the new Scram 411 is going to be a Himalayan Killer, and I'll explain why. Up until recently, the Himalayan has been your only choice for a long-range, off-road oriented adventure tourer. Within the Royal Enfield range, that is. So whether your intended off-road use was going to be 5% or 90%, there was only one model to choose from the Royal Enfield range. The Himalayan. And any bike like the Himalayan that is heavily oriented towards off-road use is going to have some compromises on the road. Let's face it, most adventure tourer owners hardly ever go off-road. Some never go off-road. They like the style of the bike, they like the rugged, go anywhere look, but the closest they're going to get to going off-road is riding up and down the occasional curb to park up. Now, I don't know what the proportion of Himalayan customers are that fit into that category, but I suspect it's quite high. And the new kid on the block, the Scram 411, has now given them another choice. I've no doubt that its off-road capabilities are slightly compromised over the Himalayan, but it still has the same rugged go-anywhere styling, and arguably, in my eyes, it's a fresher, more appealing bike to look at. Where it starts to pull ahead is with its long-range seating comfort and its impeccable road manners. Now, we know that there is luggage in the pipeline for the Scram 411, so for the moment it's compromised, but when that starts to come on tap, I think for the majority of people that are looking for that kind of bike, it's probably going to be a more attractive package. Now, Royal Enfield have cunningly priced these two bikes very close together. The Himalayan theoretically comes with a lot more equipment as standard, you know, things like the screen and the crash bars, which on paper make the Himalayan look like a better value for money package than the Scram. But the Scram is undoubtedly a better on-road bike, not just in the handling department but also in comfort. And that is a big consideration for your average rider. People like me that for the most part we're going to be on the road, but we like the ability to occasionally nip off onto a fire road or a farm track, or even just get across a bumpy campsite. Because the reality of most adventure bike owners is that's about the limit of their off-road use. And when they're not using the bike for that, they need to be able to get to work on it. They need to be able to get to the coast with the mates at a weekend. They need to be able to travel long distances on the road. And for that reason, the Scram 411 is a no-brainer really. It's the perfect bike for doing all those things. Yes, you can still do all those things on the Himalayan, there's no doubt about it. I'm not saying you can't. But if you're not travelling off-road, the Scram does it better. I think putting it in that context, it might look a little bit as though Royal Enfield have shot themselves in the foot with the Scram, but I don't think they have, not really. The Himalayan has a cult following and it will continue to command that cult respect. And I don't believe that the Scram is going to eat into the Himalayan's sales figures too much. It might a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be huge. What Royal Enfield is effectively doing is they're eating into the sales of other motorcycle manufacturers that make similar bikes. Because the Scram, being a stripped down Himalayan, effectively already has an enviable reputation and provenance. It doesn't have to prove anything, it's already been proven. And for me personally, given the choice as a long distance small capacity tourer, the Scram 411 is the bike that I would probably choose. Right, once again, thank you so much for watching this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really appreciate it. I hope you found this comparison of the two bikes useful. If you have, please leave a like, and if you're not already a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. I will of course be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.